What a brutal night for FC Barcelona and culés. This match was summed up by three catastrophic moments: the Ferran Torres miss, the own goal, and Araujo's red card. Everything else, really just details. But today we're digging into the details anyway because the performance does tell a bigger story about where Barcelona is right now in their season. Welcome to episode 753 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I am Dan Hilton, and a big thank you. This is me trying to be positive. A big thank you to everybody that joined me on the watch along on Big Up and suffered along with me. Yes, we suffered, but at least we got to suffer as a community. And I do hope that there was a lot less suffering on Saturday for Alaves, so please join me for that one. In the meantime, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Maybe go back and just a few days ago, I made that video about the young talents maybe Barcelona should be keeping on their radar. It does feel pretty relevant after a match like this. That was an absolute stinker. But before you do all of that, we should probably talk about today's match. So here they are, the five headlines from Barcelona's 3-0 loss to Chelsea. Headline one is Ferran's Flub. Unfortunately, we have to start here. There is really no other way around it. Well, technically, I am going to start by telling you about that handball that was called a handball on Fofana on that set piece in the 4th minute, just because when it's Stamford Bridge and you see Chelsea, you see Barcelona, and you see a handball, well, for those with a good enough memory, remember 2009, maybe things went the other way in Barcelona's favor. Yeah, whenever there's a handball, I feel like there's controversy coming, but I want to mention the fact that Barcelona had to pick the ball out of their own net off of a set piece, regardless of whether or not it counted. But it was a 6th minute that really got my heart in my throat. The press was working. Again, I'm going to try to find some positives from that first half, and it's that the press was working early. They got a turnover in Chelsea's final third, Lamine Yamal jumping the passing lane and finding Torres in behind. It's a great run by Torres, who was alone on goal. And that's where the joy ends. He somehow pushes it wide, and for a professional, it feels almost harder to miss from that angle. That right there is a Ferran Torres experience in a nutshell. Press well, good movement, get the chance, sometimes finish, and then you sometimes absolutely melt in front of net. So both teams almost scoring 7 minutes into this game, and both teams left with nothing. I was really hoping on the watch along that miss would not amount to anything, and how naive I was. Headline 2, both teams with a plan. So yeah, I got some of my tactics wrong, and I got my lineups wrong, which is why I'm not on either touchline. But I did get some of my tactics right, and some of the things I got right is how Barcelona had some success in the first 25 minutes. And I know this seems kind of silly because we know how this game ends, but I do want to pick out, for those who say that Hansi Flick needs to throw everything out, I do want to pick out the reasons why Barcelona did find some good opportunities in the first 25 minutes, and the tactics board is how I'm going to do that. So before we get into obviously all the negative stuff, the own goal, the red card, all that stuff, I do want to talk a little bit about what was working well for Barcelona on the press and why I thought that they were not outplayed by Chelsea in the first 25 plus minutes of this game. It wasn't until the own goal and the red card when everything kind of all went sour here. Like I had said, even though I got the lineup completely wrong, Delap not starting, and instead it was Moresca deciding to quadruple down on the runners away against Barcelona's back line. What that being Chelsea wants to do is they want to do this box midfield. That's what they want to do. So if you're listening and not just watching, it was Caicedo with Gusto, especially in build-up. Let's say the ball is with Sanchez, the keeper. You have Gusto coming inside and Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez and Reece James. That's your foursome. That's your box. And the way that Barcelona was working well to press against us is knowing that Sanchez and Chalobah are the two that are not necessarily going to be the most confident on the ball. Fofana also made a mistake. That's what led to the Ferran Torres chance. So it was Lewandowski pressing whichever one of the center backs Barcelona were going to have the man marking behind. So let's say he decided to go against Chalobah, with Ferran Torres pressing against Fofana. Sanchez's then only option there was to play the ball to Cucurella because that ball to James was a bit too far forward. Fermin Lopez then matching up with Malo Gusto, and it was De Jong who did a really good job in that first 30 minutes coming up against Caicedo. Caicedo, to his credit, got much better as the game went on, and it's a real shame that Barca could not take advantage of Malo Gusto, who was struggling with a sloppy first touch, which does make sense why Chelsea yanked him at halftime. If, and it is a big if, Barcelona could have kept up that intensity on the press, then I think Flick's game plan could have worked to get some kind of result. Because Barcelona, I thought, for parts of that first half, were the team on the front foot. And Chelsea's back line, they're a bit shaky. And in the moments of Europe, things can go in either direction. And yeah, of course, after 90 minutes and everything that happened, we know how it turned out. But if that press had continued working, then Chelsea could have been the ones to blink first. But unfortunately, that press did sour. Firmino was out of position a few times when Lewandowski or Ferran were either late or took a different angle than he had expected. And I actually did think on the positive side that Barca's rest defense did pretty well early through De Jong, Balde, Kubarsi, and Kounde. They were keeping their shape, but then about 25 minutes into the match, which isn't too long, the cracks did start to appear. There was that moment when you saw Fermin arguing with Ferran when the press got broken, and then Enzo Fernandez had another goal that was called off after a set piece. Saicedo didn't touch it, but he did affect Juan Garcia playing the ball. But that also comes about because Barcelona's backline was again defending in too much space without enough help. Chelsea also had a counter where Pedro Neto missed, but you could see through the first 25 minutes, both teams were going to have their chances, but who would take them? It's why I predicted this match would end 2-2. And I felt like in the first 25 minutes that my prediction seemed pretty smart. And then things got nasty. Headline 3's own goal shifts momentum. 27th minute in, and we are now to our second of our big match calamities. Chelsea goes short on a corner. Cucurella puts it into the mixer. Was Cucurella onside or offside here? This one was very, very close, but VAR says he is on. Either way, Kounde gets a foot on it, but it gets stuck in his feet and bounces off Torres into the back of the net. It's unlucky and ugly for Barca at the same time. But it does come after Barca's press had dropped off. So it's not just about this moment, it's about what happened leading up to this moment. They were reacting to Chelsea and not controlling and dictating. The few minutes leading up to the goal was where I think the Barcelona missed Pedri the most in this match. The goal was ugly, yes, but it did feel like Chelsea were picking up steam. And then after the goal, the train completely left the station. Headline 4, reckless and red. That came the final of our 3 big calamities in this match. And I will say, for those that are completely scapegoating Ronald Araujo, this whole thing is not on Araujo. Some will blame him completely for the result, and that is unfair. As a Kounde, I will back the players, and I will hope that they get to their top level. For Barcelona, they don't have a lot of options to swap things in and out. They have to go forward with the players that they have. But Araujo, unfortunately for him, has not only lost his starting spot this season, but now he may have lost his opportunity to play in big European matches and when the going gets tough without injuries. The worst part for him is that this is not a one-off moment. This happened against PSG. There was those issues against Inter, and now this is the third gigantic European tie where the whole world is watching, and he winds up making a mistake. Fortunately, this doesn't happen in a knockout stage. He picked up his first yellow of the match for dissent in the 31st minute after a clear foul on Lamine Yamal wasn't given. It felt like Barca didn't win any of the 50-50 refereeing decisions on the night, but as a captain, Araujo still needs to keep his head. So, come the 44th minute, Araujo barrels through Cucurella, nowhere near the ball, reckless challenge, just came flying through, second yellow, he's off with a whole half left to play. Now, for those saying that Araujo should be sold and that there's no market for him, because I think the idea of him potentially leaving Barcelona is something that I think emotionally, Kounde's after the fact, we're going to have to take a few days with this. But for those saying he doesn't have a market, that is where I completely disagree with you. You look at his physical tools and like on dating apps, there will be sporting directors out there, particularly maybe in Serie A, where I think his style would absolutely thrive, who are going to say, I can fix him. I'm not going to hear anybody else. I can fix him. And now, due to the gray in my temples, I want to give some advice to the youngins out there. Well, this is at least dating advice, not so much about transfer market advice. But you can't change people. You have to love them through their faults, or it's not going to work long term. And in the case of Ronald Araujo at Barcelona, it just seems like a case of they're not going to be able to fix him. And unfortunately, because his faults are getting sent off in major European nights, they're not going to be able to love him through his faults either. But some other club might be able to love him through his faults, and that might be a better fit in the transfer market. And that transfer market for Araujo, I think, could be at least still 50 million euros, which could be enough, if you just watch the video I made, to be in the market for Jeremy Jacquet of Rennes, who would be a like-for-like replacement. So yeah, watch that video, listen to the podcast. Maybe that'll help take your mind off of all of this. But I do think there is a market for Araujo, but I also think that Barcelona do need to look long and hard this summer at the center back spot. Is it a left center back they need? Is it just another physical defense-minded first center back that they need? I think it all depends on if Hansi Flick is going to continue as manager of Barcelona and what the next guy wants to do. Headline 5 is all Chelsea and all misery. Barcelona came out with 10 men for that second half, Rashford coming in for Torres, and they settled into a mid-block. They tried to be opportunistic with their pressing, but the press was already languishing. Rashford and Lewandowski both missed triggers in the first 15 minutes of the second half, one due to not being a very good presser, and the other one just not having enough in the tank. I will say, and as I try to sprinkle a little positivity into this 5 headlines, that Lewandowski was good in this match and showed you why he should be the one who's definitely starting in big European nights. I thought he was winning his aerial duels. I don't care what the stats said, but his hold-up play was definitely good enough, and that way Barcelona could build up through the wings. What happened when it went to the wings? Well, that's not necessarily Lewandowski's cup of tea, but Lewandowski, I thought, was important to the way that Hansi Flick wanted to play in the first half, and very much like we just talked about center back, it becomes imperative. And as much as we want to say fullbacks or another midfielder or a winger, whatever it is, it seems like the two positions that Barcelona are going to have to strengthen is a striker who can hold up play and help with that build-up, and a center back that is going to be composed in the biggest moments. Chelsea also made a change with Andre Santos coming on for Gusto. Of course, they did not want to risk him on the yellow. And with the introduction of another controlling midfielder, Barcelona wound up being on their back heels because Chelsea not only had an extra man, but also had the personnel to find some rhythm. And that rhythm did help them press a little bit more too in the second half when they were up a man. Come the 55th minute, De Jong, who again I was positive about in that first half, at least the eye test was telling me that he'd been good up to that point, but he underhits a pass. Esteval picks it up and drives at Kubarsi, fires a perfect ball past Joan Garcia. Balde did try to cover it, but the Brazilian was just too good. So now the debate will be Esteval versus Lamine Yamal, and I still don't think it's much of a debate. Lamine Yamal is head and shoulders above Esteval at the moment, but that said, any Chelsea fans who are watching this because of some Schadenfreude from 2009, yeah, welcome, and please subscribe, whatever, do all the stuff you got to do. But I do want to kind of get rid of some of your gratification. I think Esteval, and people who've been watching me for the last year now know this, that I think he's a really terrific player. And if it's not for Lamine Yamal, I think he's going to be the second best, if you want to call it that, right winger for the future in world football. And I'll go one step further and try to upset the Real Madrid fans. I think that Esteval is going to be in world football everything that Real Madrid fans think that Vinny Jr. is. Subs for Barcelona didn't really matter. Rafinha and Christensen on for Lewandowski and Fermin could not stop the third goal from happening. 74th minute, initially ruled offside, but after review, they give the goal. Balde barely keeping Enzo Fernandez on. Liam Delap got back behind the ball, and it's a tap in. But it is the same lesson, and this is kind of the question for Flick that I think people were starting to get as, again, the crankiness did get to a nadir there in the second half for Kounde. You can't really do the offside trap without pressure on the ball and pressure that starts up top, can you? It's just not really going to work. And in the second half, there was effort, but the space to pressure was so large when you're missing a player. It's hard to say that Gerard Martin almost could have done anything either. And I also don't fault Rafinha. He came into the game, he was running hard, but there's not much anybody could do when you're down a man. And if you're going to press from that high up and you're going to still try to play the offside trap when you've got an additional runner coming into your midfield, yeah, it's probably going to lead to an issue. But I do like the fact that Hansi Flick was still brave with it, though. He was down 1-0, then he was down 2-0, but it's this thing where if Barcelona were able to come back because they were trying to keep that line of confrontation high, that's the devil's advocate to this. They're trying to keep that line of confrontation high. So if they come back, then we all forget about it. And we say, Hansi Flick, what a genius to be able to come back in a game like this when you're down to 10 men. But it didn't work out that way. It's risk or risk aversion here. And Hansi Flick, as we know, is a manager who likes his risks. He takes them and he swallows those bad results when they happen because you take those risks. So with this result, Barcelona are looking at a possible 16 points at the most in the league phase, which may be enough to sneak into the top 8, but they more than likely will need to fight through that playoff round. I agree, it stinks, but remember, it is still just November. They're just 1 point off in the Liga table, and they still have all to play for. Yeah, maybe they'll get a little bit of extra home field revenue from that first knockout, but you also lose on that bonus for finishing top 8. So I don't know how the numbers all work out there. Somebody can let me know about that. That said, yeah, it's not the worst thing, but if you're going to play like this, I guess play like this now in November and not in April. But after this one, I will say, too, the big question still stands about Hansi Flick. Is this a system problem, or was today an individual issue for a number of players? Barca has struggled when other teams press them. They still have their issues. But today, the individual errors created that 3-0 scoreline. It almost makes it impossible to judge the team as a whole. And I've said this many times before, when Pedri is not on the field for Barcelona, I'm not going to be slamming that panic button. So no panic because Pedri wasn't on the field. But there is still an issue with Barcelona. They are not having the reliable solutions for when chaos happens. And Chelsea tonight won the battle of chaos. Again, I hope there is not as much chaos this coming Saturday. I'll still be at it, so join me on bigup.com for the watch along. For that one, we're going to have some fun, hopefully chatting about some positive Barcelona goals and see if they can get back to their winning ways. They have been up and down this season, so this is a down. So you're hoping they get back up before the new year comes, because there are some big matches left to go in the coming weeks. I'll continue to see if you subscribe on the YouTube channel or the podcast apps. And lastly, I want to remind you, just in time for the holidays, I have reopened the merch store. So whether it's a gift for yourself, or I think, the young kids, they must love listening to a yapping 30-something talk about FC Barcelona and all that cool stuff that some Barcelona podcast creator has to say. So hopefully the teenagers are on board, but if not, and for everybody else, until next time, Forza Barça.